All my life, I tried to be the kind of woman people could rely on. Not flashy, not loud, just steady. When my ex-husband, Ray Ellison, walked out on me and our 3-year-old son, I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart. I did what I had to do. I cleaned houses by day, stitched clothes by night, and raised my boy, Daniel, in a little 2-bedroom on the edge of Montgomery, Alabama. We didn't have much. I remember once I had to choose between paying the electric bill or buying him new sneakers for kindergarten. I picked the sneakers. We lit candles for a week, and I turned it into a game. He thought it was fun. He never knew it was because I couldn't afford light. Ray? He was long gone by then. Took what was left of our savings, hopped in a rusted Chevy with a woman half his age, and disappeared into another state. I'd wake up some nights clutching my stomach, sick with worry, not about him, but about how I was going to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. When Daniel was in middle school, I picked up a second job cleaning the waiting room at a dental office. I'd come home with bleach on my hands and cracked heels in my shoes, but every night I made sure he had a hot meal, clean clothes, and someone to quiz him on spelling words. I didn't have time to be sad. I had bills. I had a boy who needed me to be everything. As the years passed, I watched Daniel grow into a quiet, serious young man. He got good grades, stayed out of trouble. When he got into college on a partial scholarship, I cried harder than I ever did at any funeral. I worked nights, sold quilts at weekend markets, and skipped meals just to make sure he never had to drop a class because of money. I didn't date. I didn't travel. I didn't even buy new clothes unless my old ones had holes I couldn't patch. Every dream I ever had was packed away in a box marked maybe later, because Daniel came first, always. After he earned his master's degree and proposed to a sweet girl named Lena, I wanted to give him something more permanent, something real, so I offered him the house. Not just offered, I renovated it. The house Ray and I bought when we first got married had fallen apart over the decades. Sagging porch, cracked tiles, water damage in the kitchen ceiling. I dipped into the one thing I'd guarded for years, my savings account, the same one I'd built working double shifts and hemming pants under a single bulb. I poured every last cent, over $200,000, into that place. I tore up the old flooring, hired a contractor to update the plumbing, got fresh cabinets installed for Lena's baking habit. I repainted every wall myself, one by one, in soft earth tones I thought would make them feel at peace. I even added flower boxes outside the front windows, filled with fresh lavender and white petunias. Daniel was busy with work. He didn't see the dust or the noise or the way my hands stiffened from hours of painting. But that was okay. I wasn't doing it for praise. I was doing it for him. When the renovations were done, I offered the master bedroom to Daniel and Lena. Told them I'd be fine in the smaller room. After all, what did I need? Just a bed, a lamp, and a place to rest. I was already used to disappearing into the background. I thought I was finally entering a new season of life, a quieter one. Maybe I'd take a sewing class. Maybe I'd learn to grow tomatoes. I imagined soft mornings with coffee on the porch and the sound of Lena humming while she cooked. I imagined laughter. I imagined peace. But deep down, maybe too deep for me to admit, I thought just this once, someone might turn around and say, "Mom, you've done enough. Let us take care of you now." I didn't know it then, but that kind of moment, it never comes when you're raising someone to believe your love is endless and your needs don't exist. And so, on the day I handed Daniel the keys to a house that had nearly broken my body to restore, I smiled and stepped aside, believing I had finally built the home my son deserved. I had no idea that in just a few days, everything I'd worked for would be thrown back in my face by the very boy I raised to be better. My 62nd birthday started the same way all the others had. Quietly, I baked a small peach cobbler before sunrise and left it on the counter for Daniel and Lena, just in case they remembered. I didn't expect balloons or flowers. Honestly, I didn't expect much at all, but I never imagined that this would be the day my son would hand me the kind of heartbreak I'd never thought possible. Around 11 a.m., I heard the front door creak open. I was in the back room folding towels, humming to myself. "Mom," Daniel's voice called, a little too chipper. "We brought someone with us." We? I walked into the living room, wiping my hands on my apron, and there he was, Ray Ellison, gray in the beard, thinner than I remembered, sitting in a wheelchair like some gentle old man from a war movie. But I knew better. The man in front of me wasn't a hero. He was the very storm that tore my life apart. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. Daniel placed his hand on Ray's shoulder like it was the most natural thing in the world. "He's had a rough time lately," he said, as if I didn't know what rough looked like. "Broke his leg. Can't really take care of himself. I figured maybe he could move in for a while." My mouth went dry. Move in? Here? Daniel nodded with a kind of clueless optimism that made my heart ache. "Yeah, just until he's back on his feet. It's the least we can do. He's still my dad, Mom." Still his dad, like that made everything okay. I looked at Ray, who avoided my eyes completely, staring out the window like a bored tourist, humming to himself, tapping his fingers on the armrest like he didn't even hear us talking. I turned back to Daniel. "Where exactly is he going to stay?" Without hesitation, he answered, "The master bedroom." I blinked. "Your room?" "No," he said flatly. "Yours." Then, as if that wasn't enough to knock the wind out of me, he added, "And you can sleep with him. That way it'll be easier for you to help take care of him." I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I just stood there, staring at my only son, wondering how many steps it took for someone you raised to look at you like a servant. "I know this is sudden," Daniel added, suddenly avoiding eye contact, "but you're retired. You've got time. And honestly, having you both under one roof used to be my biggest dream as a kid." That sentence hit me like a slap. I took a deep breath and asked, as calmly as I could, "Daniel, do you even know what today is?" He paused, looked at Lena like maybe she'd have the answer. Lena stepped forward, eyes soft. "Maggie, I'm so sorry. We forgot. Things have been so hectic lately." "It's not on you, sweetheart," I said gently. My eyes never left Daniel. That was for the boy I raised for 32 years. Daniel's face twisted in frustration. "Mom, I've been under a ton of pressure. I just forgot, okay? Can we not make this into a big thing?" A big thing. I felt my throat tighten. He remembered to bring back the man who abandoned us, but couldn't be bothered to remember the woman who stayed. The woman who rebuilt the very house he now handed over to that man like it was some cheap motel. "I put over $200,000 into this house," I said quietly. "That was my life savings, Daniel." He waved his hand. "And I appreciate that, Mom. But spending on your son isn't exactly a sacrifice. It's just what parents do." And that was the moment something inside me cracked. Not broke, just cracked, like porcelain under pressure. Silent, but irreversible. Ray, who hadn't said a word since he rolled in, suddenly sat up straighter. "This house? This house was given to me by the company, Maggie. I got every right to be here." I turned to face him, my voice flat. "That house was assigned to us the year we got married. I paid the taxes. I fixed the pipes. I made it a home. And I want back every dollar I put into it." Ray scoffed. "You're really gonna fuss over some damn money? Spending on your kid is your job." "No," I replied, eyes locked with his. "It was my choice, and now I'm making another one." Then, without warning, he spat at my feet. "You think you're better than me? You always did." I stepped forward, slow and steady, my fingers trembling, but not with fear. For decades, I'd cleaned up his messes, covered bruises with makeup, wiped tears in the dark, sacrificed every piece of myself for a boy who once screamed, "I'll tell Daddy to come back and hit you." Now here I was, staring at the man who once made me flinch just by walking through the door. I didn't flinch this time, and I didn't break. Not anymore. The air in the room had gone ice cold. Not because of the thermostat, Daniel had the heat on, but because something had snapped inside me. A wire, a wall, a silence that had lasted far too long. I looked at my son and said clearly, "If your father stays here, And if you're asking me to live like some unpaid caregiver, then I want my money back." Daniel frowned, confused. "What money?" "The money I used to renovate this house," I replied, voice steady. $200,000, my savings, my retirement, my life's work. Ray chuckled, dry and bitter. "You act like you're entitled to something. You think you're gonna run off now and spend it on some man? Please, you're nothing without this family." And just like that, I realized something he never had. I wasn't trying to run away. I was trying to finally live. I walked over to the bookshelf, picked up a small wooden box that held the last few papers I hadn't filed away yet, my renovation receipts, printed statements, handwritten lists of every tile, fixture, and coat of paint. I documented it all like it was sacred, because to me, it was. "I'm not asking for a favor," I said. "I'm asking for what's mine." Ray leaned forward in his chair and snarled, "You're delusional, Maggie. Spending on your kid? That's what moms are supposed to do." I didn't even flinch. My hands curled into fists at my sides, not from rage, but from decades of being dismissed, talked down to, used, and ignored. I had put up with it when I was younger. I thought I was doing it for Daniel. But now I saw clearly. In a move I didn't plan, didn't think through, I stepped forward and slapped Ray across the face. Not out of hate, out of truth. He toppled sideways out of his wheelchair, crashing to the floor like a bag of old bones. Daniel rushed to help him up, shouting, "Mom!" "What the hell? You didn't have to do that." I stood completely still. "Say one more word," I said calmly to Ray, "and that slap will be the least of your worries." He muttered something under his breath, but I didn't bother listening. I turned to Daniel, held out my hand. "If you don't have the money now, write me an IOU." "You're seriously asking me to pay you back?" he snapped. "After everything?" "Yes," I said, "because this house was never yours to give. And if your father gets to waltz back into your life after abandoning us for over 20 years, then I get to walk away without apology." Ray started up again from the floor, wheezing and groaning like an old villain in a bad movie. "I got money, Danny," he yelled. "When I die, it's all yours." I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Then maybe do us all a favor and go ahead and give it back now. Save us the wait." That shut him up. Lena, poor girl, looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She stepped toward me, trying to smooth things over. "Maggie, please. It's just a bad day. Everyone's emotional. We didn't mean for it to go this way." I looked her straight in the eyes, voice low but firm. "If you really think you're part of this family, then count me out. I won't live in this house like a ghost. I'm done." I went to the back room, grabbed the suitcase I'd packed days ago, not because I planned this moment, but because I knew, in my gut, it was coming. You can only be ignored for so long before you start preparing for the storm. As I wheeled the bag through the living room, Daniel followed me. "Mom, you've made your point. Can't we just cool off and move on?" I didn't turn to face him. "Don't call me Mom. You stopped treating me like one a long time ago." Just as I reached the door, Ray's voice rang out from the bedroom. "Oh, let her go. She loves being the victim, right? Poor little Maggie. We're all such monsters, and she's just a saint." I paused, turned around, and walked straight into the room. I bent over, looked Ray dead in the eyes. "You've been a coward your whole life. I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to beg. And I sure as hell won't humiliate myself anymore just so you can feel big. Whatever you need to survive from now on, it won't come from me." He didn't say another word. I left the house I had built, brick by brick, and walked out into the cold evening air, dragging my suitcase behind me. My legs were shaking, but not from weakness. It was adrenaline. Power. For the first time in over 30 years, I felt like I owned my life. I didn't have a plan, didn't know where I'd stay for long, but I knew one thing. I would rather sleep on a stranger's couch than in a house where my love was used as currency. The streetlights were flickering on when I finally reached the main road, my suitcase rattling against uneven pavement. I didn't look back. Not once. If I did, I knew I'd hesitate. And I couldn't afford to hesitate anymore. Not after all the years I spent second-guessing my own needs. I pulled out my phone and found a listing for a shared rental across town. It wasn't much, just a small apartment above a strip of local shops, but it was available, affordable, and mine to choose. The place was about 25 minutes away by bus. I booked it. When I arrived, the leasing agent, a young woman in her 20s with a high ponytail and paint-splattered jeans, gave me a once-over. She didn't say much, just handed me a key and a manila envelope with the lease. Then, right as I turned to go upstairs, she called after me. "Ms. Ellison?" I turned. "I saw on your file. It's your birthday today. Happy birthday." She held out a little bakery box. Inside was a single slice of strawberry shortcake, fresh and fragrant. I blinked, stunned for a second. Then I nodded, whispered, "Thank you," and climbed the stairs. That night, I sat alone at the tiny kitchen table, looking at the cake under the glow of one old ceiling bulb. It was the only birthday gift I'd received, and it came from a stranger. I took the first bite, and the sweetness hit me so suddenly it made my eyes sting. I didn't cry when Ray spat at me. I didn't cry when Daniel told me to share a bed with the man who used to scream at me in the middle of the night. But that first forkful of cake, that broke me, just a little. Later, I found myself staring into the mirror of the small bathroom. The woman looking back at me didn't resemble the version I once knew. Gray hair twisted into a low bun, tired eyes, a face lined with decades of unpaid labor and quiet grief. I whispered, "What now?" And the answer came without words. I remembered something I'd tucked away for years, the old sewing machine my mother gave me when I first got married, the one I used to make Daniel's Halloween costumes and repair Ray's torn shirts before he stopped coming home. The machine had been sitting in the garage, covered in dust. I went downstairs to the curbside bin the next morning. There it was, right where I had thrown it out during the renovation months ago, telling myself I'd never need it again. Its foot pedal was snapped, the thread holder gone, and the casing scuffed like it had lived too many lives. I lifted it gently and carried it upstairs. I wiped off the grime like I was brushing dirt from buried treasure. That afternoon, I picked up some secondhand fabric at a local thrift shop and stitched together a new tablecloth. Then I made curtains, then pot holders. My hands remembered the rhythm like they never forgot. The scent of jasmine drifted through the window from a potted plant someone had left behind. I added 2 more pots from a nearby nursery. When the wind blew through them, the entire apartment smelled like a southern summer. A few days later, I met my new roommate, Chloe Mitchell, 23 years old, full of energy, a graphic design student who worked part-time at a coffee shop and talked like the world still had magic in it. The first night she knocked on my door, it was because she smelled soup. "What are you cooking in there?" she asked, practically bouncing in place. "It smells like home." I laughed and invited her in. I'd made chicken soup with onions, carrots, rosemary, and thyme, an old recipe I used to make for Daniel when he had the flu. She took one bite and looked like she might cry. "Ms. Maggie," she said, "you're kind of amazing." From that moment on, we became something like an odd pair. She brought me snacks and silly stories from school. I taught her how to mend a button and simmer broth from scratch. One evening, she handed me a small box with a delicate pendant necklace inside. "You need something pretty," she said. "Not for anyone else, for you." I hadn't worn jewelry in years. I'd always told myself I didn't need it. But when she clasped it around my neck and I saw myself in the mirror, I didn't look like someone's mother or ex-wife. I looked like me. Another night, as we shared leftovers, Chloe said, "Ms. Maggie, you've got stories in your hands. You should film them." I chuckled. "Film what?" "Your sewing, your cooking, just life." And so, she helped me download an app, set up an account. We filmed our first clip of me sewing a cushion cover, then another of a pot of soup bubbling on the stove, then Chloe laughing in the background as we tried to fold fitted sheets. To my surprise, the videos started gaining views, not thousands, but dozens, then hundreds. Strangers left comments like, "Reminds me of my grandma." This made me smile today. I want to learn how to sew like this. And for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered. Not as a mother, not as a caretaker, not as a wife, but as a woman with a voice, a skill, and a story worth sharing. Spring had just begun to peek through the trees when Chloe burst into the apartment one afternoon, holding her phone out like it was on fire. "Ms. Maggie, is this your son?" I looked down at the screen. There he was. Daniel, standing in the middle of a crowd, holding a microphone in one hand and a bouquet of cheap supermarket roses in the other. His eyes were red, voice shaky in that perfect, practiced kind of way. "My mom raised me alone," he said to the camera. "She worked hard, so hard. Everything I am today I owe to her. But now, my father's come back. He's sick, he's alone, and all we want is to be a family again. But my mom, she walked out. She chose bitterness over forgiveness." I stared at the screen in silence. Beside him stood Ray, leaning dramatically on Daniel's arm like an aging actor playing the role of a lifetime. His eyes drooped, his chin trembled. He clutched his cane like a prop, not a tool. A man with a plastic smile, the host, turned to the live stream camera with a theatrical sigh. "Folks," he said, voice dripping with fake empathy, "this isn't a movie. This is real life. A mother who gave everything. A father who made mistakes. A son caught in the middle. Doesn't this deserve a second chance?" Soft piano music began to swell in the background. I looked at Chloe. "Where is this?" She gave me the name of a local park just a few blocks from our apartment. I didn't even change my shoes. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the edge of the crowd. People whispered when they saw me. Some raised their phones. "That's her," I heard someone murmur. "That's the mom." Daniel spotted me. His voice faltered. The host smiled wide, eager for a reunion twist. "Ms. Ellison," he called out cheerfully, "you made it just in time. Would you like to say a few words?" I stepped forward. "Give me the mic," I said. Daniel hesitated but handed it over. I adjusted it slightly, turned to face the crowd, and spoke. "Yes, I raised my son alone," I said. "Because this man," I pointed to Ray, "left me with nothing but debt and a 3-year-old boy. He didn't just walk away, he erased us. While I worked 2 jobs and stitched clothes under a dim bulb at night, he was drinking and laughing with another woman in another state." Ray shifted uncomfortably, the tremble in his chin gone now. "I didn't remarry, not because I was waiting," I continued, voice steady, "but because I had no time to think about myself. I was too busy feeding a child, keeping the lights on, learning how to sew so my son would have clothes for school. I sacrificed everything, including my dreams, so my son could build his." Daniel looked down, his face pale. And when I finally thought I might rest, just a little, my son invited the man who broke me back into our home, asked me to share a bed with him, told me it was only fair. The crowd shifted. The host tried to cut in, but I held up a hand. I am not the villain of this story, and I am not a prop in someone else's redemption arc. I am a woman who gave until she had nothing left, then walked away to save what little was left of herself. I handed the mic back to Daniel. He didn't say anything. I turned to walk away, brushing past Ray, who still held the wilted roses in his trembling hand, waiting for a moment that would never come. No one clapped, no one needed to, but somewhere in the crowd a voice whispered, "She's right." And that was enough. Later that week, Chloe found me in the kitchen, sipping coffee and staring out the window. "People are reposting your clip everywhere," she said. "You've got thousands of comments, people thanking you for speaking up." I didn't check. I didn't care about going viral. What mattered was that I'd said it out loud, in public, on camera. For the first time in my life, I had spoken not as a mother, not as a housekeeper, not as a peacemaker, but as Maggie Ellison, a woman who had finally reclaimed her voice. Daniel didn't call for days after that. When he finally did, I didn't pick up. He had made me a character in his story. I had rewritten mine, and this time, I was the main character. Weeks passed after the live stream. I didn't hear from Daniel again, and for once, I didn't check my phone wondering if he'd call. I kept going, to choir practice, to community college classes, to the little thrift shop where I bought fabric by the yard and traded recipes with the cashier. I had found peace in my own routine. Then, one Sunday morning in April, I was sitting on a bench in the apartment courtyard, reading a used copy of To the Lighthouse, the sunlight soft on my shoulders. The wind turned the page for me. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. Daniel. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but emotionally. Like the last few months had peeled something back. His shoulders were slouched, and there were deep shadows under his eyes. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, unsure, like a boy outside the principal's office. I closed the book and nodded to the seat next to me. He sat down. For a long time, we said nothing. Then, almost shyly, he said, "I took Lena to her parents' house last week. Her mom packed us some of those cornmeal pancakes she loved as a kid." I nodded, waiting. "She asked me if I ever made you breakfast on your birthday. I couldn't remember a single time." He glanced at my shoes, a sleek pair Chloe helped me pick out, and offered a small smile. "You look like you. I don't know how else to explain it." I turned my head slightly, watching him. "When I was little," he said, "I thought you were fearless. Like nothing could hurt you, but now I get it. You weren't fearless, you just didn't have the time to be afraid." That hit harder than he probably knew. He paused. "Lately I've been learning to cook. Lena says my tomato and egg noodles aren't as good as yours, but she's sweet about it." I smiled faintly. "She sounds like a good woman." "She is," he said, then grew quiet again. "Dad's gone." I raised an eyebrow. "Not dead," he clarified quickly. "But I sent him back to a care facility. He was too much. Even the agency stopped answering our calls. He made things worse with every caregiver we brought in, took Lena's things, destroyed stuff, disrespected our home." He exhaled. I kept trying to defend him, thought if I held on long enough, we'd finally have the family I always wanted. He looked at me, eyes finally clear. "But I see now. I already had a family. I just didn't treat it right." I didn't speak. Let the silence sit where it needed to. I thought being a man meant taking control, solving things. But maybe being a man means learning how to care, how to show up without asking someone to carry your weight. He looked down. "Mom, I know it's late. Too late maybe. But if you'll let me, I'd like to get to know you again. Not as your son, not as someone who needs something, just as someone who wants to understand who you are." I didn't answer with words. I reached over and gently patted the back of his hand. "If you can take care of yourself," I said softly, "and the woman you chose to marry, then that's all I've ever wanted." He nodded slowly. I think in that moment, we both understood. This wasn't a return to the past. It was a new beginning, on new terms. A few weeks later, I received a card in the mail. It was from Lena. Inside, hand-painted flowers framed the words, "Thank you for raising him, and thank you for letting go, so he could learn how to turn around and look back." I taped the card to the fridge, right next to Chloe's postcards and a photo of me at the top of a hiking trail. Every time I opened the fridge, I saw them. They didn't remind me of what I lost. They reminded me of what I'd finally chosen to keep, for myself. There's a hard truth that many people, especially mothers and lifelong caregivers, learn the painful way. Love without boundaries is often taken for granted. The story of Maggie Ellison reminds us that when sacrifice goes unrecognized, it stops being noble and starts becoming a weight. And when love is given endlessly but never returned with respect, the one giving begins to disappear. Maggie believed that loving her son meant giving everything, asking for nothing, and staying quiet. She thought that loyalty would eventually be seen, that her efforts would speak for themselves, but after decades of pouring herself into others, she came to a powerful realization: if you don't prioritize yourself, no one else will. The lesson here isn't to stop loving or stop caring. It's to love with awareness, to give with intention, and to walk away when your presence is only valued for what you provide, not who you are. When Maggie left the home she had spent her life building, she didn't just walk away from a house, she walked away from an identity that had defined her for too long. She chose not to be just mom or the ex-wife or the quiet caretaker. She chose to become Maggie again, a woman with history, hopes, talents, and strength still burning inside her. In that journey, she rediscovered something many of us forget. Freedom begins the moment you stop needing permission to be happy. If you've ever spent too long putting yourself last, let this be a reminder. You're allowed to change. You're allowed to reclaim your worth. And you are allowed, more than allowed, to live a life where you don't have to ask anyone if it's okay to feel joy.